I think what we're witnessing is the end of this patriarchal approach, which is hierarchical. And it's also an approach to power, which, as you're saying, research has established that it's not an effective approach to power, but we're still stuck in those old ways of doing it. Um, and so I think what we're heading more toward is not back to a matriarchal state, but to what we need is balance, balance between the masculine and the feminine approach, and energies which course through every one of us, because that balance between the masculine and the feminine energies course through all of the cosmos.
What kind of leader do you want to be? This is one of the fundamental questions that I try to help new leaders answer, and it's a big part of the purpose behind the Leading with Integrity podcast. It's to present you with various different takes and approaches on leadership and the nuances surrounding it, so that you have options to consider when answering this question for yourself. My guest today is Christian de la Huerta, a transformational coach, award-winning author, and TEDx speaker with 30 years of experience guiding people towards more fulfilling relationships, whether personal or professional. Christian helps his clients break free from those internal barriers to build authentic connections through his unique approach that transcends conventional therapy. So we'll be exploring his work and his books today, hitting some of those big topics like authenticity, but also some newer takes on power, on masculinity and the patriarchy, on the influences that these ideas have and the dynamics that they can introduce in the workplace, in our relationships with other people, and our society as a whole. And then we'll go from those big ideas right the way down to the daily practices, what we can each be doing as leaders, as managers, to avoid becoming the next generation's bad management cliches. If you are new to leadership and management and you've had a bad experience with a boss in the past and you're determined not to carry that forward into your own approach, then I would love to hear from you. Please reach out to me on LinkedIn or visit the website and sign up for my Integrity Leaders community. Online connections, learning, and resources for new leaders who want to be better than the last bad boss they had. You will find links in the show notes. The website's on the screen right now as well, and there's more details on that website. It's leadingwithintegrity.co.uk.
Welcome to the Leading with Integrity podcast. Leadership talk for the modern manager. With your host, David Hatch.
Christian, welcome to Leading with Integrity. It's lovely to have you on the show today.
Thanks so much for having me. I've been looking forward to the conversation.
Likewise. And I'm going to push you in at the deep end, I'm afraid. Tell us a bit about yourself, your career so far, what you do today, why you do it, all of those lovely things.
Just a simple question, huh?
Yeah, isn't it?
I've been in, let's call it the transformation field, both personal transformation and collective transformation. It's been almost 35 years now. I come out of the psychotherapy tradition. My dad was a psychiatrist. My degree's in psychology. And I was on a track to get a PhD up until the time where I experienced breathwork as a healing modality, and I jumped tracks. I never went for the PhD. So I've been doing that for 35 years. It's a combination of life coaching combined with breathwork, which is a really good combination. Because one of the reasons that therapy can fall short, like in the right hands and with clear goals, therapy can be amazing and very effective. And we all know that you can sit on somebody's couch or in somebody's office for years and in some cases decades, and nothing really happens. We're sitting there rehashing the same old crap. the reason for that is that the trauma no longer lives in the head. It's been somaticized. It lives in the body. So no amount of talking about it, talking at it is going to help. Whereas a modality that like breathwork, it bypasses the mind and it goes to the source of the trauma where it lives in the body and it clears it. And so very effective, and it heals at multiple levels. What drives my work is paraphrasing Einstein, that you can't solve a problem from the same level of consciousness in which it was created. When I look at the world and all the problems that we're facing collectively, any single one of which is completely overwhelming, I think about how do we dig ourselves out of this hole that we have collectively dug ourselves into. And the only answer that I come up with is a revolution in consciousness, a leap in consciousness, something that's going to shift the way we see ourselves, the way we see each other and this little planet of ours. So something that's going to change everything, because we can't just keep, throwing the same old stuff at trying and hoping that it's going to change. So I see my work then as supporting that revolution in consciousness.
Yeah, I mean, there's another famous Einstein quote, isn't there, about the nature of insanity and doing the same things over again, expecting different results. So,
Yes.
yeah. I mean, so that link between the mental and the physical is something that's long fascinated me. I hear quite a bit about it in the context of like stress in the workplace and burnout and things like that, because those are quite often, rightly or wrongly, perceived as like mental concerns, but actually they have real and often serious physical manifestations as well. So it is an interesting field, and breath work as well. So tell us a bit more about that, and specifically for those in the audience who maybe don't know what it is and haven't heard of it before. Like, what is it? How does it work?
Yeah, and you're right. We can't separate the physical from the mental and from the spiritual. It's all one thing, and the emotional as well, which is a whole other conversation about how we have suppressed our emotions. But breathwork is a large umbrella term. Like anybody who's been to a yoga class has done breathwork. Right? There's different breathing practices, different techniques that have different purposes. Some are for stress reduction, for relaxation. Some are more have more of a kind of energizing effect, focusing effect. The type of breathwork that I'm talking about is sort of like meditation on steroids. You breathe in a certain way for about an hour and a half, and amazing stuff happens. I've done it all over the world, David, and like when I hear myself talking about it, I still think, this sounds too good to be true. That just from breathing, all that stuff can happen. Because on top of all the healing that happens, and I'm including physical in that, and I can tell you some amazing stories about physical healing. I think it sounds too good to be true. This can't really work just from breathing, but I can't argue with results. It works, and they haven't studied breath work. Like there's so much research on meditation and what's happening in the body. They're now starting to study breath work. But if you think about it, what helps me understand why it is so powerful and why it works, and as far as I'm concerned, like everybody should be doing it. It's so accessible and so simple. And when we think about the fact that in most spiritual traditions in the world, one word can mean breath or it can mean spirit, depending on the context. And maybe maybe this is an interesting way to get started in a conversation on leadership, podcast about leadership, but it works. I just cannot argue with results.
No, fair enough. And it is interesting. And so, I mean, one, I guess, very small example that maybe people will have heard of is this idea of box breathing, which, again, in the stress context, for example, quite useful in high pressure situations to kind of take that sort of physical step back and just consider for a moment. And then I've also read it's useful for people who are struggling to sleep as well, in terms of like regulating mood and slowly settling themselves down to fall asleep nicely. So, Yeah, it is an interesting field. I did meet someone years ago now, I can't remember her name, who was a former free diver who then got into breathwork, which I guess that makes quite a lot of sense, doesn't it? Because you have to be pretty good at managing breathing and oxygen and things if you're going to do something like that. Anyway, that's a tangent.
Yeah, and there's the work of Wim Hof, who uses the breath work, or uses the breath as a way to transcend the limitations of the body. It's a different approach, different intention, but again, it works. And you see that man climbing snow-capped mountains in shorts. So there's definitely something about the breath. So let me tell you one story about physical healing that just kind of boggles my mind still. My mentor, the woman that I studied with 35 years ago to learn how to offer this to others, when she started out, she was doing her first session and it was a one-on-one. You can do this either as a group or you can do it one-on-one with a coach. And there she was going to town breathing, and she heard the facilitator snap her fingers. And for some reason, it triggered a memory she'd forgotten when she was 5. She got into an argument with her daddy, I forget about what, but she got in a huff and she was going to run away from home and got on her little bike and started pedaling down the sidewalk and hit something and fell over and broke her nose. It was black and blue for like 3 weeks. So at the end of the session, she turned to the woman and she goes, "Wow, how did you know to snap your fingers at that moment? It triggered this memory that I'd forgotten about." And then I connected all these dots about how that experience had impacted my relationship with men throughout my life. And the woman like goes, "I didn't snap my fingers." So what they figured out as they kept on exploring what happened, what she heard was actually, the cracking of the bone, the breaking of the bone. And the next day at 45, so 40 years later, she got up in the morning to brush her teeth and looked in the mirror, and black and blue all over again. Not for the whole 3 weeks, but for like a couple of days while the body corrected itself and healed itself. So how does that happen from breathing? I don't know. But I can tell you that it works. And I've worked with so many people all over the world who, like, I've yet to come across anything that heals past trauma, like emotional, psychological trauma, than this. And on top of that, it affords like incredible unitary experiences of consciousness, like exquisite ecstatic states. I often hear people telling me, "Oh, I got to the same place just using the breath that I did on a sacred plant medicine journey like ayahuasca or mushrooms or anything like that."
Wow. I mean, that is a powerful story. A little bit crazy. It does make you wonder, doesn't it? Like, what's
I
going on?
know.
Yeah.
I know.
I thought you were going to tell me the instructor was a ghost or something. Like, maybe she
Yeah.
was. Who knows? Good example again of what we were saying about like the connection between brain and body, and I guess emotion as well, because that would have been tied up in that situation too.
Yeah, all interconnected. And I don't know that our science is there yet that we can explain how. It's all interconnected, but it is. I don't think there's any question about that. And that we're interconnected to each other too. That's another one that sounds like woo-woo spiritual teachings, but um, I don't know if you saw the documentary by Tom Shadyac. It's called I Am. And it's really fascinating, the stuff that they come up with, the kind of stuff we're talking about. But in one particular experiment, they have him sitting at a table, and across from him, there's a bowl of yogurt with electrodes connected to this little thing that measures electrical activity, and there's no physical connection between him and the bowl of yogurt. And then, knowing perfectly well that he just went through a bad divorce, that they'll ask him, how's your marriage going? And the yogurt has an emotional response, or has some kind of a response. Um, when have you met with your attorney lately? And again, the yogurt has a response. So if we're connected to the bacteria in a bowl of yogurt, how can we not be connected to each other in some way that we don't understand yet?
Yeah, I haven't seen the documentary. I'm now going to go and find it. But it's a funny odd thing, isn't it? Like what we choose to research and what we don't, almost those choices alone kind of govern the knowledge, don't they? And I don't know. I mean, you think to like silly common turns of phrase like electric personality, for example, and you wonder like, what's the origin of that phrase? Like, is there something in that, or is it just somebody thought it was funny once? And yeah, who knows? Who knows? I'd love to see some more science into that kind of thing, a bit
Definitely.
of research. And maybe we'll get there. Maybe AI or something will enable all of these things to be done sooner than they might have otherwise. Yeah, interesting. So changing direction a little bit. Something you didn't mention is, I believe, you've written a book as well.
Yeah, I've
Can
actually
you?
got 3 books out.
3 books. Well, there you go.
Yeah.
Okay, so tell us a bit more about those and the process behind them, what prompted you to write them, who they're for, all that sort of stuff.
The the most recent book is called Conscious Love, Transforming Our Relationship to Relationships. So it's about how to approach relationships consciously in a way that they have a chance of working. Because the sad truth is that we haven't been taught how to approach relationships, how to do them. So we just keep repeating the patterns that, how our parents did them and their parents before them. Um, and we got very limited understanding of what like love is and what the expectation about our relationship should be. So for example, if we're approaching a relationship hoping that it's going to fulfill us, that it's going to make us happy, forget it, hang it up. There isn't anyone out there who's going to make us happy, and it's not their job to. Like, how unfair to put the weight of that responsibility on somebody else, or even on the relationship. You are going to make me happy. It's like, yikes. It's a lot of work. It's a big responsibility. So if that's how we're approaching them, they're not going to fare well. So that's that one. The previous book, it's called Awakening the Soul of Power, because we gotta, most of us, and I might even say all, I hate to make generalized statements, but I would say, let's say most of us have an ambivalent relationship with power. Part of us wants it, part of us is afraid of it. And um, no wonder we have an ambivalent relationship. We've been conditioned to believe that power is a bad thing, like with quotes like power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And what good person wants to be corrupted? But they didn't tell us about that, David, is that Lord Acton, who said those words, who spoke them, um, was speaking specifically about political power, not the interpersonal power that we're talking about and that gets us into trouble. And on top of that, we have, it's opening the door to the conversation about relationships. We've been conditioned to believe that the emotions are a bad thing. And emotions are weakness, especially for guys, like you and me. Little boys don't cry. And a couple of faulty statements around that, faulty thinking about that is like, emotions aren't strength. They're not weakness either. And the feminine certainly isn't weakness. If we think that only little girls cry because that's weakness, it's like, wait a minute. If you want to talk strength, courage, resilience, let's talk about the power of creation that resides in the female body. But what happens when we put those reasons together is we end up overriding our feelings, and sometimes you could say even our dreams, our thoughts, our desires, and we end up settling. For stuff that it's not what we really ultimately want. How many times have we said yes when inside it's really not okay? And we end up settling for an illusion of peace, or security in a relationship or a job, when deeply inside we're not happy. It's not okay with us. It doesn't work. Um, so it's not a good strategy. And then the book talks about how do we step into power in a different way, in a way that is not hierarchical, that doesn't require that we step on somebody, put our knee to their neck in order for us to feel powerful.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean about the word power in itself. So it's a word that I try to avoid when I'm talking about leadership for exactly the reasons you're talking about, because there is a misconception around it. It is something that's often seen, and in my own direct experience as well, as something that's very easily abused or used for the wrong means or the wrong ends. And I think it also goes hand in hand with that question about emotions and empathy and whether these are strong or weak concepts and how people
Right.
perceive them. And I think that's really interesting in the context you're talking about. It's also interesting in like workplace and leadership and politics as well. And that quote, yeah, there's so many of these quotes on there that are really famous in modern life, where we're only getting half of the sentence.
Yes.
Like the other one that immediately comes to mind is "Great minds think alike." We've all heard that. The whole quote is "Great minds think alike, but fools seldom differ." And that second part is important.
Oh,
Great minds may think alike, yes, but so do not great minds. And that
that's
second
fun.
part completely changes the meaning, doesn't it? And that's probably why
Completely
we're never
changes
told
the
it.
feeling.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Well, if you look at the etymology of power, it's like it comes from, like, in Spanish is poder, or in French pouvoir, which means just to be able to. So that's all it means, right? It's capacity, is the ability to do, is to be able to do something.
Yeah, it has taken on new meaning, I think, in modern society,
Yeah,
definitely
yeah.
modern political life.
Yeah, and the other reason we have an ambivalent relationship to it is that how many, like you're kind of pointing us in that direction, is how many times have we witnessed abuses of power, whether in our personal lives or out in the world, and no
mm,
wonder we, like, who wants to be that way? And so it leaves a bad taste in our mouth, and we kind of reject the whole thing.
mm, yeah, yeah. And even, you know, setting aside like the abuse of it question, just the pursuit of it and making that a goal for your career or for your life. I mean, it's a pretty empty career or life, I think, if that's all you're in it for. But it
Yeah,
also leads you down bad paths in terms of the way you interact with people, the way you see relationships in work and in life as serving that goal and not really being there for their own ends, even really.
right.
I mean, you can probably talk a lot about the personal relationship side of this, definitely way more than I can. But I think there's also a really interesting like workplace dynamic there as well. So if we look at things like,
For
the
sure.
prevalence of authoritarian or autocratic leadership in workplaces versus more modern methods that are like proven to be more effective for all sorts of things, not least of which the bottom line. And yet people still think in terms of this sort of power dynamic. And it's something that really interests me, but also very, very much frustrates me about modern workplaces.
Well, and even in the political arena, like in the
Mm.
US, we're struggling slash flirting with that approach to power these days. And,
Yeah.
to me, what's interesting is that, and you see that in different parts of the world too. And when I think about it, and this again might get a little bit too abstract, but for your podcast, but I think what we're witnessing is the end of this patriarchal approach, which is hierarchical, and it's also approach to power, which, as you're saying, research has established that it's not an effective approach to power, but we're still stuck in those old ways of doing it. Um, and so I think what we're heading more toward is not back to a matriarchal state, but to what we need is balance, balance between the masculine and the feminine approach, and energies which course through every one of us, because that balance between the masculine and the feminine energies course through all of the cosmos. So much to the surprise of some humans, we're part of the cosmos, so we're impacted and affected by the same energies that govern the stars.
Yeah, I always try to keep in mind, it was Carl Sagan, wasn't it? The tiny blue dot quote. We get very self-important, don't we, as humans, as a whole race of people, like as well as at an individual level. I think it's quite important to remember like what our place really is in the grand scheme of the universe. I think
Oh my
that
God,
humility is important.
which is infinitesimal, We're like a
Isn't it?
speck in this unimaginably vast universe.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, I'm a big advocate of humility in leadership as well. I think, you know, when you get a bit too self-important, a bit too in love with yourself as a leader, I think it tends to lead you down bad decision making.
Powerful. That's a powerful thought, and a great way to connect those two thoughts. You're so right.
Yeah. You talked a bit about the sort of the masculine and the feminine energies, and I know that there's a particular quote about one of your books about it being written largely for women. I think to relate this to our workplace context and leadership and management a little bit, if we can. So there is it's almost become a cliche now. Like there's a question around why are there so many bad managers and why are so many of those bad managers men? So, I mean, in the context of your work and what we talked about so far, like, is there an answer to that? Do you think? What is that answer from your perspective?
Well, I think it's not so much even about the gender. Um, I think, well, in part of it, I think, is entitlement, that, you know, men have just been traditionally held all the power, and so there's an expectation about that, and maybe even a sense of entitlement. But I think it's even beyond that. I think it's more about the leadership style, that patriarchal, hierarchical, my way or the highway, doesn't lead to a lot of communication and dialogue. Um, and the more feminine um, approach, which is more like everybody at the table, and more about equality, and it's just more inclusive. It leads to more conversation. It leads to cooperation, um, and not so black and white thinking. Right? It's more inclusive of different thoughts, and that's all qualities. Those are all qualities of effective leadership.
I think so. Yeah. It's. I mean, so we look at some of these statistics around this because there have been a few studies into trying to answer maybe not this specific question, but certainly things around like so. For example, the FTSE 100. I think maybe only 10% or less of the CEOs of those companies were something other than a white man of a certain age. So it's not just women there, like there's all these other minorities as well that are wildly underrepresented, even compared to like the general distribution in the entire population. And I think I think the entitlement point is good. I think you're right there. I think there is a phenomenon where men will apply for jobs even if they're not qualified for them, whereas women are much less likely to do that.
Yeah, exactly.
And there's data around that, and with good reason. And that's the way I agree with the women in that scenario. Like that's the way it should be. If you're not qualified, you're wasting everyone's time. Frankly, like no hiring manager wants to have to sift through this. Like and it is entitlement. It's I'll take a chance on it. You never know. Maybe nobody else will apply, and then I'll get the job. And I think that definitely perpetuates this sort of bad manager kind of scenario where that's why there's more men in that situation. I think you're also right. There's a structural thing. I think the workplace, particularly in the Western world, the sort of behaviors that have over the last sort of 20, 30, 40 years been rewarded with promotions have been what I would call toxic management behaviors, which again, men are far more likely to exhibit and are also far more likely to do so deliberately because they've recognized this is how you climb the ladder. And I do think that's changing.
Yeah, I did too.
But I also think, yeah, the economy as a whole and structurally is changing anyway, isn't it? Outside of like big multinationals, give it 10 years, I think majority of the workforce will be working for themselves, will be freelancers, solopreneurs, running their own kind of side hustles that have become their full-time jobs. Because I think newer generations are less open to working for, in inverted commas, the man.
I I totally agree. And also things are changing, as like in the US, I don't know about the numbers in the UK, but here in the US, more than 50% of college graduates are now women. So the patterns are kind of inevitable. And I think what we need is balance. I'm not saying that women to be in 100% control of choices and decisions and the world. Although I got to tell you, if women were when women are in 50% of power in the world, we're going to have a very different relationship to war and poverty and hunger and social justice and how we treat the environment. And we need that. We need to approach that in a different way.
I agree. I think there's where it gets maybe slightly contentious for me is we're at risk in these kind of conversations of saying that things like empathy and emotional intelligence are feminine qualities.
True.
This is where I kind of I don't know if it's controversial, but I don't necessarily agree with that, because I think, men are just as capable of doing these things. I think the reason why they don't is what we need to be looking at and talking about and doing something about.
Exactly. It's because of that conditioning that we were talking about a while back. It's because, we have conditioned ourselves and trained ourselves. Little boys don't cry. It starts all the way back.
Yeah, it's social expectation.
Yeah, the emotions are weakness. It's like, wait a minute. That's what makes women effective as leaders, is that EQ and that ability to intuition, to read between the lines. And by the way, this isn't just woo-woo stuff. There was an article in the Harvard Business Review a few years ago about intuition being one of the top qualities of effective leadership. So we're moving in that direction. We're catching up, all of us.
Absolutely. And I think I don't know if it was the pandemic itself, but I do think the COVID years we saw a shift in, and maybe it's a generational thing as well. I don't know. Maybe it's kind of a bit of both, or it's two sides of the same coin. But I think the newer generations, as they're entering the workforce, they are expecting things like flexible work, hybrid, remote. They're expecting things like values in the workplace, purpose-driven roles. And with all of that as well, and that whole kind of COVID shock of everything, the more sort of emotionally connected, emotionally open, transparent, perhaps to an extent, but also the empathy and emotional intelligence, the ability of leaders to recognize emotions in others and then make allowances for those, for situations, for context. I think all of these are becoming expectations in the workforce now, as opposed to things that, I mean, even when I first entered the workforce, would have been sneered at, refused. Like, if you did those, you would be seen as weird and you wouldn't get a promotion, sort of thing. So I do think that's a good shift. It's a step in the right direction. It's meaningful.
I totally agree.
And I'd love to understand more, like, why it's happened exactly, because I'm just guessing, really. Like,
no, but those are some pretty thoughtful, rounded reasons as to the possible whys.
Yeah, I mean, I can't think of anything else that changed dramatically in that time period.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and I would bring it back to that for sure. And then I would also reintroduce the concept of the end of the patriarchy and the balancing between the masculine and the feminine.
Yeah.
That's harder to quantify or to point to or to study, but I think it is a factor.
Yeah, I hope it is. I think, I mean, it is difficult right now, isn't it, given like the political context, like some of the statistics I've talked about in terms of workplace and corporate life. Those haven't really changed for a while. In fact, I think a couple of years ago, they actually went back in the wrong direction again for a little period. So maybe these are like the last kicks of the dying patriarchy. I don't know, but
yeah, I think it's like the pendulum, right? We take 2 steps in a certain direction. It's like, whoa, that was a bit too much. So then there's a step back. But I think the progress, the direction is inevitable. Yeah, I mean, it's just absurd, right? To me, to deny half of humanity, more than half of humanity, or to consider the part of us as less than, just doesn't make any sense.
No, it doesn't make sense to me. But then I think there's trying to walk the line now politically. So it doesn't make sense to you and I, and then we also see ourselves as very rational because every human does. Like none of us would see ourselves as irrational. And I'm sure that's true for people who hold the opposite point of view. They see that as rational for whatever reasons too. So it is difficult.
Yeah, yeah. And I think part of the reason for that is that in times of dramatic change in which we are, like where everything's kind of changing, the way we see ourselves, the way we see the planet, we're in critical situation in terms of the environmental crisis that we have unleashed upon ourselves. That we're just now beginning to witness the effects of that. So in times of dramatic change, for a certain percentage of us, that strong man leader, totalitarian becomes attractive, right? Where everything is defined and where you're told what to do and what to believe and what's right and what's wrong. Everything's defined for you. So to me, that's how I understand that. To me, it's part of this our collective progression and evolution. And it helps me understand the pendulum and the 2 steps forward and 1 step back. It's understandable.
Yeah, yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I mean, if you look at it in the economic context as well, I mean, historically, there's quite a few examples on there, mentioning no names, but some pretty horrific examples actually of during really bad economic times when that sort of strongman persona came to the fore.
Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. So let's not go down the dark, vicious circle of talking about past dictators. As much as I enjoy studying history, that's just too depressing. So, what do you think leaders who are men in workplaces today should be doing to A, kind of help solve this problem, but B, make sure they themselves don't become one of these bad manager cliches?
I mean, it's to me, it's what we're talking about. Is go inside, go within, develop your emotional intelligence, right? Make yourself a more complete human being, which is going to make you a much more effective leader. To me, it's as simple as that. Easy to say, not necessarily easy to do, because the inner journey requires courage.
It does.
And requires the willingness to do work and to face ourselves and to ask hard questions of ourselves.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
and hence, it's a really heroic effort.
I was going to say, yeah, it takes a bit of courage, that, and a bit of being honest with yourself as well, which again, I think as humans, we're not always the best at that.
Yeah, it's to me, in the Power book, I have, even though we said we were talking about how it's for everybody. I think everybody struggles with issues of power, but it's particularly dedicated to the women because of what we were talking about, the imbalance between the masculine and the feminine. But I do have a chapter on kind of re-envisioning traditional roles that men have fulfilled. So, for example, the provider, which is one of the ways in which men identify. But that's having to be rethought because in the U.S., again, I don't have numbers for the U.K., but at 20, I think it's 25 to 30%, in traditional heterosexual households, the women are like in 25 to 30% of those households, the women are out earning the men. So it's forcing men to, I think that's why so many of the men are in crisis, because if it's an identity thing, if I'm not the provider, who am I? And what is my purpose? And I think the outcome of these questions are good, right? Because the men are much more than just providers. But in addition, like another one that I think is relevant to this conversation is it's the explorer, the conqueror, roles that we have played throughout history. But now, there's not that much more to explore. But what about the inner world, the inner realms? Those definitely could use more exploration. And conquering, yeah, you don't need to go out conquer other people and other tribes and other worlds, but conquer yourself, conquer your own weaknesses inside of you, your own ways in which we sabotage ourselves. Explore that. Why do we do the things we do? And that is a heroic journey.
Yeah. So I don't mind admitting. So I'm in that situation to an extent. So my wife is the major breadwinner of this household, and that I wouldn't say it was an easy or difficult transition for me. Like, to an extent, I didn't really notice it because it happened during the pandemic, and we were both here anyway, and it's kind of snuck in. But I found something really helpful for that. I mean, on the few occasions it bothers me, it's a reframe. It's not about who's the provider or the major provider. It's about what did each of us contribute? How are we contributing?
Exactly.
Seeing yourselves as contributors towards an equal or a partnership or however you want to define it. I don't know. For me, that works. I also quite like not having to have the stress of going out and doing all those other things. Like, it's quite nice.
Exactly. No, that's great. That's a beautiful way to frame it. But there's so many other things that we can provide. Provide a safe environment at home. And I don't mean safe physically only, it's like safe psychologically. Provide, be the rock in which your family, your kids, your spouse, um, can feel safe enough to grow and to blossom and to thrive and to be able to explore aspects of themselves that they may not be able to otherwise. That's invaluable.
Yeah, and not to say either that that's all Mrs. Hatch contributes is the money. Like, there's much more that she does as well. So, I think maybe this part is part of this trap that, removing the gender from it, I think we all quite often fall into of just viewing ourselves through that one single lens and letting that define our entire identity, whatever that be.
That is the truth. And I mean, and it's, you would think that we would have learned that by now, right? That there is no amount of money, no amount of possessions, that's going to make us happy or give us a sense of fulfillment. Like, how much more evidence do we need? How many, wealthy celebrities, political leaders do we need to look at and to witness to realize that it's not going to make us happy? That definition of worldly success is not going to fulfill us. There's no amount of money that's going to make us happy or give us a sense of who we are or give us inner peace and the ability to sleep at home, to sleep well peacefully and to look at ourselves in the mirror.
So I agree. However, I would also say, and perhaps this is because just like the structure of modern society, there is a threshold of money that you do need before you can do any of those other things, right? Like, if you're always in survival mode. So money doesn't make you happy, but yeah.
Without a doubt. Without a doubt.
And I think that is really like the shame of modern society in a lot of ways.
Yeah, without a doubt. Like there's a huge difference between having nothing and being able to feel safe and secure and be able to explore your potential. But I think the misunderstanding or the illusion that we have is that having more money is going to make us happier, and it doesn't really work that way.
No, I think if you figured out the secret to happiness separately, then more money presumably would make you even more happy because you know how to do it. But
right.
But yeah, I see what you're saying. Like, there's no direct connection, as it were. Yeah.
Right.
And as for like family and gender roles and things, I think there's the parallel for me, which I think is interesting. You may disagree, but so we think about quite a simple concept in the workplace, the 9-to-5 working day. And that is a hangover, an artifact of the Industrial Revolution, when everyone had to go to work to a factory. And so because the literal means of work was at another location, that was it. You had to be there and the boss could say when and when not. That hasn't been true for like 50 years, 100 years, more, I don't know, but quite a long time. Long enough that the workplace has had time to adjust. And yeah, it's only really in the last 5 years, say, that's become normalized to the point of if you try and do it, you won't lose your job.
Right.
And I think that's an interesting parallel for how slowly we change and develop. When you look at it in the case of like traditional understanding of roles of genders in households, I mean, again, that's not really been a necessity for even longer than that, hasn't it? I mean, centuries, arguably, since we left the caves or whatever. So it's a bit, I don't know, it's sort of, again, it's fascinating, but it's frustrating at the same time.
Yeah, it's both, for sure.
So I could carry on with this for another hour, but I think we should talk about leadership a bit more specifically, because that's probably why most people are here. So from your career so far, if you had to pick like the top lesson, the biggest thing you've learned about leadership, what would it be?
That's a good question. Well, I think the power conversation applies, like realizing that there's different kinds of power, and that there's a way to express our power in a way that doesn't require that we put anybody else down or step on them. That approach about power with rather than power over, I think that was very enlightening. I would say too that leading by example rather than and walking our talk, right? So having that integrity or having that sense of congruence, that there's a match between what we say and how we feel, what our values are, what our beliefs are inside. I mean, maybe those are the qualities that I admire in leaders. And humility, that's another one. That humility is like, for me, when I look at a teacher or a leader, um, that's one of the things that I look for is humility.
Yeah, it's interesting. We've talked a lot about kind of preconceptions and misconceptions today. And for me, that humility piece speaks to one of the biggest myths of leaders that we all tell ourselves when we do it for the first time about, my role in this situation is knowing all the things, having all the answers, making all the decisions, etc. And it's just, once you've done it for a little while, you realize, hopefully, not everyone does, sadly, but you tend to realize those are myths. Those are frankly stupid. Like, of course, you're one person. Of course, you can't have all the answers and make all the decisions perfectly and know everything. Like, you're a person, you're not a god. So, get rid of that. Apply a bit of humility. And leading by example, one of my favorite things to do as a leader. Like, that is my favorite bit of leadership theory. In fact, it's kind of the origin of leading with integrity. That's what it was really about at the start. Having encountered too many leaders, one in particular who shall remain nameless, who very much did the opposite of that. It was kind of the do as I say, not as I do sort of mentality.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
once you encounter that a few times in your career, again, you realize pretty quickly it's not just ineffective, it's damaging to the people that person is leading. So yeah, there we go. But a really good answer.
Yeah, and I love the way that you added to it, and implicit in that humility to me, it's confidence, it's power. But again, that inner power, that authentic power, what I call soulful power, that doesn't need to prove anything to anybody. It just is. And I think about Gandhi, and maybe that's a sore conversation, but or a Gandalf, from the Lord of the Rings. From in their simple monastic robes, their sandal feet, from looking at them from outside, you would never know the power that they hold until it's called for. And then, get out of the way. Get out of the way. Like, Gandhi brought the British Empire to its knees when it was at its zenith, at its highest point, without ever shooting one or landing a punch. That's power.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I'd say it was at its highest point. Yeah, maybe. It was on the way down of the curve, definitely. But yeah, he definitely helped it go further down faster.
Yeah.
And to be honest, rightfully so. But I'm probably going to get a kicking from my countrymen for saying that. I think, the confidence point is really important as well, because again, like, there's so many misconceptions about confidence and what it means. So in the leadership context, for example, and probably in most of life, we associate the outgoing, the loud, the outspoken, the person who gives the grand speech, speaks first, all of these sort of things as being confident. Actually, I think it's the opposite. I think that's their expression of a lack of confidence.
I agree.
It takes massive confidence to be able to sit in a room full of people and say nothing and listen, I think, in a
Yes.
workplace, at least.
Yes, I agree. And it depends on what the driver is, right?
Mm.
Because if what's driving that staying in the quiet is fear, then it's not. Right? Because for me, I can relate to that. Like what you're saying is completely true. Like not have to feel like you have to say something about everything. Right. That the confidence of like staying observing until you see that there's a need for you to say something, not just include yourself to say something. Um, but I also the other side of that is I remember being in meetings and like having the right answer, but not having the confidence to speak up in that moment because of fear. It's like, wow, what are they going to think? Or fear of like, what if it's not right? Um, so it could be both. It could be both.
Yeah, that's true. The context does matter. I think it comes down to what you said earlier. It's not having anything to prove, not
Yeah.
feeling like you have to. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Exactly.
If you could start your career over again, is there anything you would do differently?
Well, I would definitely start strategic financial planning sooner. Um, and I live in trust. I know that I'm fine. I know that I'm gonna be okay no matter what. But it's sort of like the Sufi saying goes, trust in Allah, but tie your camel. Um, and I would have started doing that sooner.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a good life lesson for everyone. I think everyone probably would say that, regardless of their stage of life. Except maybe in their 20s when they're too young to understand. Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. Like
Well,
they
at least I
say,
was.
youth is wasted on the young. Like if I could only know then what I know now.
That's life, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
Awesome. Right. So my favourite question is the one I always save for last. Because I really enjoy the answers to these. We've had some weird and wonderful ones and some like really genuinely thoughtful and meaningful ones to this question. So, feel free to take it in either direction. It's up to you. But it's leadership heroes.
Leadership heroes.
So if you had to pick one person, but they could be literally anyone you can think of, they could be alive or dead, past or present, real or even fictitious, if you like, but someone who, in your opinion, would perfectly embody leadership, who would that person be for you and why?
Well, maybe to redeem myself with the your UK audience, I would say King Arthur. Um, and because of that whole concept of the round table, and the fact that his worth came not from conquering or destroying or killing. It came from his innate qualities and his innate worth that allowed him to pull the sword out of the stone. And because his approach to power was not hierarchical again, it was like having everybody at the table. And having the wisdom to listen to advice from others, whether it was Merlin or the other knights at the table. Um, and again, that inclusiveness. I think those are all incredibly powerful leadership qualities.
Yeah, I agree. He's an interesting sort of semi-historical, semi-mythical figure.
Right.
And so like there's places that you can visit in the UK. One in particular I've been to down in Cornwall, which is right in the southwest bottom part of the UK, which is, allegedly the castle where he was born. There's not much of
Mm.
it left. It's like a few rocks and a bridge and like a few knee-high outlines of buildings that used to be there. But at the same time, wizards and dragons and that can't be true, can it? So I don't know. He's an interesting figure. I love the round table concept as well. I'm totally with you there. The other big part of his myth, though, is when he dies, he's not really gone. He will return in England's hour of greatest need, I think, or something like that. And then you're like, well, when was that? When is that? How much worse does it have to get? Like, we've had 2 world wars, like the fall of empire. We've had pandemics, and
Yeah.
makes you worry
Yeah.
a little bit about the future. That.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think that comes with the
Yeah,
mythifying of great
yeah,
leaders.
I'm being a bit facetious, but yeah, it's he
Yeah.
is a
Yeah.
very compelling character, though, whether he's real or
Yeah, he
not.
is. It's I don't know I don't know where you draw the line between what's true and what's myth, but it's certainly something to admire and aspire
Yeah,
to.
yeah. I think he probably did exist, and I think he was maybe a senior knight or a king of a very small kingdom somewhere in some part of England that's been lost to history. As for the rest of it and Merlin and all of that, I don't think that's true. Merlin might have been just one of his advisors or something, or
Yeah.
a scientist, right? Like,
Yes.
would have appeared as magic.
But what a great story. We're still talking about it and portraying it in film and novels. They're still doing that.
Yeah. Or maybe they were con artists. Maybe the sword was never really stuck. Like, who can
Yeah.
tell? Yeah,
Who can tell? Yeah.
fun to think about though. Yeah. And I think you get bonus points as well. I don't think anyone's chosen King Arthur before, so well done.
Oh, really? That's
Yeah.
interesting. I'm surprised. And what about you? What would you say?
Ooh, it's a good question. So I because I get to ask the question so often, I have a selection. I do think Captain Picard from Star Trek is quite a good one.
Oh, that's a good
Yeah.
one. That's a good one for sure.
I sort of like Winston Churchill, but then there's also slightly problematic parts of his history as well. And I think I veer away from historical figures just because
Yeah.
we've no way of knowing what the truth was about them because they're too long ago. And the further back you go,
Yeah.
the worse that gets.
Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
also,
Like I thought Alexander the Great, but again, like at what cost
yeah,
to the rest of us did he
indeed.
conquer the world?
Yeah. Anyway, right. So I think we've covered all the questions. Christian, thank you so much for your time today. I've really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much, David. What a great conversation. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah. Well, we'll come back anytime. Happy to talk more with you anytime. And yeah, last thing I will ask you actually before I let you go is if anyone in the audience wants to know more about you or the work that you do, would you like to point towards websites or anything like that?
Thanks for asking that. My website is soulfulpower.com, soulfulpower.com. And thank you again. And thank you for having the show because in your willingness to do that, I know real lives and real leaders are being supported and taken to the next level.
Oh, I appreciate that. Well, Christian, have a great rest of your day, your week, your year. Yeah.
Thank you, David, and you as well.
Christian, thank you so much for that conversation. Really enjoyed exploring those social concepts, the slightly controversial subjects there with you as well. And I think we also managed to offer some helpful guidance for leaders in the audience too. And for those of you who follow politics and current affairs, I think it's worth pointing out this conversation you've just listened to was originally recorded mid-December 2025. So several weeks before certain strongman political events that have been dominating the headlines in the month leading up to the release date of this episode in January 2026. So we may have been accidentally relevant there in some of our discussion today. Anyway, thank you again so much for listening or watching. Do check out the link to Christian's website, which is in those show notes down below. Have a look at his website. I encourage you to consider buying one of his books or perhaps dropping him a message if anything in today's episode struck a chord with you. And as always, my own details and website are down there as well. If you're a new leader feeling that loneliness at the top or the isolation of middle management, and you're not sure how to be the best leader for the context you are working within, then do come and have a chat about leadership with us at the Integrity Leaders community. Details to be found at leadingwithintegrity.co.uk. Have a browse of that website If you want to learn more, there's a green button there on the homepage, which will take you to the community sign-up page. And if you have any questions, queries, worries, or you want more information before you join, as I mentioned at the beginning, my LinkedIn profile is down there as well. So drop me a DM anytime and let's chat leadership. That's all I have for you this week. I'll be back next Wednesday with my next guest, Dr. Paul White, psychologist and author. We'll be discussing his 5 languages of appreciation in the workplace. Hope you'll be back with us then. And in the meantime, be a leader, not a boss.